Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a very special discussion about the Netflix original documentary Disclosure, which is currently available on Netflix. This is a presentation of Outside the Box Office at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, and I'm very excited to introduce the director-producer of Disclosure, Sam Feder. Sam was cited by IndieWire as an exciting trans filmmaker shaking up Hollywood. Sam's work explores the power dynamics and politics of media-driven identity, connecting urgent issues in the trans community to the struggles of the past. The Advocate named Sam's feature, Kate Bornstein is a Queer in Pleasant Danger, one of the best LGBT documentaries of 2014. Feder's work has been supported by the Ford Foundation, Fork Films, the Jerome Foundation, the McDowell Colony, and Yaddo. Moderating tonight is Eleanor Jean, and I just first want to really thank Evan Hughes for connecting us to Eleanor. Eleanor was previously credited as Elle McClelland and is a television writer-producer originally from Amarillo, Texas. Her credits include Transparent, Mrs. Fletcher, and 2 seasons of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. She has a ton of shows in development, both in the comedy and drama spheres, most of which focus on trans and queer characters falling in love and getting into lots of trouble. Eleanor loudly identifies as a queer trans woman. She spends the pandemic writing, playing Nintendo, and conversing with her 2 perfect cats, Ruthie and Estelle. So just before I ask Eleanor to take it from here, I just wanted to let everyone out there in the audience know that we're going to be taking Q&As through the Q&A box. So please just write your questions there. And then when we open it up to the audience, I will call on people individually. I'll invite you over to the panelist side, and you're welcome to turn on your video. We'd love to see you if you're prepared for that. But don't feel like there's any pressure to. You can just turn on your mic and ask your question. And if you'd like to ask a question but don't want any of that to happen, just put a note with your question that you just like the moderator to ask it for you. So. Welcome, Sam, and welcome, Eleanor.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks so much, Alex. Great. Well, as I just told you before everyone got on here, I'm Eleanor Jean, and I'm such a huge fan of Disclosure. I have a lot of questions, and maybe we can just dive into them if that's cool. I just wondered if you could start by talking about kind of what was your impetus for making this film. It has such a notable focus on media representation specifically, and I haven't seen that in a documentary, and as a trans person, it's wonderful to see, and it was very eye-opening. So I was just kind of wondering how it all came about.
Well, it's very nice to meet you, and thanks for that question. So I think, you know, it's a topic I've been thinking about really since I started making films in the early aughts. I think I started my first film in 2002, 2003. And at that time, I was also teaching college, and there were 2 documentaries that really changed my relationship to the media. One was the 1987 documentary called Ethnic Notions, and it's about the representation of Black people in film in Hollywood. And it's by Marlon Riggs. And the other one was called The Celluloid Closet, and that was in 1995, and that's about gay and lesbian representation in film. And those 2 documentaries in particular really changed how I understood how I had internalized and consumed media, you know, over my lifetime. And so I'd always sort of wondered what that history would look like if we looked at the evolution of trans images, but it wasn't a film I thought I would ever make, right? I'm not a historian, I'm not a trained archivist. So it was something I just always hoped to see at some point. But then, you know, fast forward to 2014 and trans visibility was increasing and mainstream society was talking about us more than ever before. And, you know, there were 2 things that were really disconcerting to me about how the media was insinuating that visibility is the goal for the trans movement and that trans people were something new, right? So I felt deeply compelled to give trans and non-trans people more context to understanding these changes in our culture. Right, to give a sense of the history and how we got to this point of visibility. But it was really important to me in telling this history that we foreground the fact that visibility in itself is not the goal, right? It's a means to an end. And then that's really bookended in Disclosure. And so, you know, at the time in 2015, I felt like there was more to the story than what the public was seeing and talking about. So I wanted to tell that story.
Yeah, I think you've definitely accomplished it. It really does, especially when you frame it that way. It feels like such a step forward in the conversation. And I think, I think a lot of us kind of, these were like things we were feeling, and I'm, trans friends and like constantly talking about trans representation in the media. And there is kind of like, it did kind of feel like a plateau feeling. It's like, well, there are a few trans people on TV and we're almost done with cis people playing trans people. So like, we're good, right? And it's like, no, that's not, we're not, there is no finish line here. Like we just have a long way to go. And I feel like your film, it just really made such a mark on me. And and not just like my trans friends or even queer friends, like cis people, straight people. I mean, everyone who's seen it, and it seemed to have like got a great publicity and a really wide audience. I mean, I had like straight friends who saw it before I did, and I was like, wow. But I was wondering, I guess, just kind of between, not that there's just two audiences, of course, but I guess who was like your target audience? Like, did you have one when you were coming into this? Or like, I really want who to see it?
I mean, first and foremost, my target audience was trans people and continues to be trans people. There's something about seeing this history all in one place in a context that I believed and hoped would allow people to move beyond it in a way that they hadn't before, right? And so when you see it outside of yourself and you see all the hate and the shame and violence, and you see that it's something that was taught to you, that it's not inherently part of who you are, and you kind of start to see a source of one of the places that maybe those mythologies were created, I do think it can be cathartic. And so that was my first and foremost goal, while having this documentation and a conversation started to hope to push that conversation forward, because it was really frustrating in 2014, 2015, when it felt like the conversation had begun and end, right, at the same moment, basically, and had become a very static conversation of, okay, now there's a little bit of visibility and you're all good, where meanwhile, visibility is very complicated, and there's a big paradox to visibility, and as when we look at history and we look at social justice movements, and as marginalized movements, become more mainstreamed, backlash always ensues. So I was really feeling that we were on the precipice of that. And it was, the summer before Trump was elected, and it was the summer that Caitlyn Jenner had her show. So things were really changing in a way that did not resonate with my experience in my community, my experience as a filmmaker, the goals that I had, making films about trans people. So yeah, first and foremost, my audience was trans people. And then, but I do think it also can serve in that as a catharsis for non-trans people, because they're also taking in these images and they're also dealing with their own stereotypes that they have, whether they want to or not, right? So it's like, so this is a way for people to start to undo what they've learned, right? Because if 80% of Americans say the only trans person they know is someone they've seen on television, right? Television has a huge responsibility.
Yeah. I just want to go back to what you were saying about this kind of, in 2014, the media representation you were seeing just at the time was not reflecting. Can you go like a little bit deeper on that and just like talk about what were you feeling versus what you were seeing, and what that disparity kind of felt like from your view?
Sure. I mean, I think it was, probably, let's see, trying to take me back. So I want to be really, really honest about that moment and that time and what was happening. I was in New York, and I feel like we were in the midst of a few years of a lot of build up around a lot of organizing, right? And the community was feeling more emboldened, more people were getting politicized. It wasn't so much, I feel like in the early 2000s, at least, I feel like even answering this question, I'm doing it just like a disjustice to history, right? Because my entrance into trans history really came about in the early 2000s, but there was a lot that was happening before then. So I don't want to make it seem like things just started with my memory, So, there was many different types of movements over the years. But so I entered the early 2000s, and I would say by, 2010, 2012s, we're getting this movement in New York. That's where I was based. And it was like, there was a lot of talk about employment and housing and healthcare and people being incarcerated and just life, just getting by, just living, just being safe on the street. and it just felt like we were just trying to create a community to keep people alive. And so that's what I was seeing every day. That's what I was seeing people were talking about and concerned about. And, you know, television and films are fun, they're cute, but then when you start to see your community that's been so erased and hidden and talked about in such, in ways that claim we're not real, that we don't even exist, to suddenly see your community become commodified, right? And so this commodification upon our images, and non-trans people getting all the credit for this, right? And non-trans people getting rich and accolades and awards and opportunities, while, you know, the communities that I was, you know, circling within were not experiencing that. And so there was a real disconnect, and it felt dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so important to highlight, because I mean, in certain aspects, I mean, not certain aspects, in a ton of aspects, that disconnect is still very much there. And so I think pieces like Disclosure, just in my view, just like really, it helps kind of bring these two realities. One of them is reality and one of them isn't, but like these two ideas of reality closer to each other. It was really powerful. So just going back to like starting it, did you have any idea of like who you wanted to reach out to first? And you're like, I'm gonna do this. I know exactly who to talk to. Like, how did you get? Because it was an amazing cast of people. Like, I feel like I'm working in TV. I was just like, oh, I know like so many of these people. It's like you got everybody, and it was like I loved it. How did you go about that? What was that process?
It is an amazing cast, and it's not everybody. There's so many more people,
For sure.
you know, who are part of this history, who have brilliant things to say. And I wish it could have included everybody. And I can't wait to see the other projects, you know, that build upon Disclosure. You know, what took me by surprise was the moment I decided to focus on Hollywood. Because in the beginning, that was not what I was going to do. I really wanted to show what indie work had been doing over the years, what the international conversations were. And I also, you know, naively thought I could talk about all types of media, right? Not have it be relegated to film and TV. But as I decided to take on this project, the first thing that dawned upon me was telling a history is really ethically precarious, you know, and I certainly was not going to do that in a vacuum. There was no book that this topic was based on, whereas the films that I cited earlier, Ethnic Notions, Celluloid Closet, those are based on books. So I assumed there was a book about this. So I thought it was going to be a lot easier, but alas, there was no book. And so to collect this history, I started by doing research interviews with about 70 people across the country. So I started, just kind of made a list of all the trans people that I had known who'd worked on one side of the camera or the other. A lot of them showed up in the final film. And then through that list, I reached out to people they recommended to me, and spent about 6 or 8 months doing these research interviews. And like I said, I did not expect it to be focused on Hollywood, because, you know, 20 years ago, I turned away from Hollywood. I stopped watching mainstream film and TV because in every direction it was offensive somehow. And I just felt like, why would I ingest this? Why would I continue to consume media that makes me feel horrible about myself or my belief systems or, you know, the world I live in? So, you know, when it dawned on me that it was going to be about Hollywood, I was a little like, I'm not sure this is the story I want to tell. But that was where the overlap was, right? That was where the collective memory rested. And I realized that would also, you know, it's something that so many of us share, that it really could be a moment of having a conversation that, you know, I only imagined a tiny bit of what it's become. So does that answer your question? I forgot what your question was.
No, definitely. It definitely does. Yeah, I was just the process of it, of just like, I was just kind of like, how do you even begin? Like, because like you said, there's no book. So it's like, it just feels like such a huge undertaking. What were some things that you found that surprised you? You know, like going into it, kind of like, what were your expectations? You know how like a lot of documentaries, I guess, like, you know, you go in doing this and then in the middle of the documentary, it's a different one because you found something different. Like, did you have moments like that?
I mean, the biggest one was turning towards Hollywood, for
Right.
sure. That was my biggest surprise. And I feel like I resisted it even into the film for a couple of years. Like, is this really the story that needs to be told? Other things that were really surprising was, this idea about healing and catharsis. That was my hope for the final product and what that would do for the audience. But what surprised me was on set, there were these moments where it was all trans people kind of in the circle in the, Video Village is behind the screen, behind the cameras, but where there was my DP who was trans, our second camera who was trans, our PA who was trans, myself, the person we were interviewing. And it felt, there were moments we kind of forgot anyone else who was around, even though most of our set was trans and a lot of people were queer, which is, I could talk about our production model in a moment. But there were these moments where I felt like these conversations were shared for the first time, right? Feelings that a lot of us had experienced over the years in isolation, whether we were literally isolated or with people who just weren't going to get it, or we didn't feel safe kind of expressing our reactions. Suddenly these feelings were being shared and expressed. And whether those were moments of like nausea that we felt, or we could laugh at the ridiculousness, there was something really beautiful in those moments, right? To have this shared knowing experience, again, is something that allows you to own the story, and take it into a different direction. Yeah.
That's such a special, that's a special feeling that I got while watching it. Just even there were moments, and notably when Jen Richards talks about her parent and her whole experience through that, I just, and seeing when she was on I Am Kate and seeing the other parent, how they just like love their trans kid for being trans, and just as I was watching that, I was just like crying, and then just had just truly like out of my mouth the exact same words Jen said at the same time. And it was like, those moments are so powerful and important. And I feel like, I don't know, as my experience being trans and a lot of other people's, I know, just like those kind of moments are really important of these things that I thought was just me, like, and I thought that was just me. And then it's like, no, you're not alone. No, you're not alone. And even like, yeah, I still have those moments like constantly, like, years and years after transitioning. And it's I think those are just, I don't know, just pontificating. Sorry. I'm just, it's like
interesting, because that makes me think about how, we spend so much time kind of trying to come to peace with those feelings of being alone, right? And trying to be like, it's okay, it's fine. Like, there's why should that be an issue? We live alone, we die alone, whatever. But then those moments when we realize we're not, it's like, wow, like something just opens up in a way that you didn't even know you wanted,
Yeah, and at least in my experience, it was like in those moments, it lets me think of myself a little bit more, like in like a higher regard, and which I think is so important to any kind of survival and thriving. Yeah, I really love that like this movie had those moments in it. Like, oh yeah, I've never talked about that, and here it is. Sorry, I'm just kind of.
No, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You had mentioned the moment when Jen said something you were about to say it. Which line? Do you remember? Not to put you on the spot, but which line was it?
It was something about like just my wishing that my parent, like I just saw that parent, that was just like, your trans kid's like a unicorn, and I was just like, immediately it was just like, not to make it too melodramatic, but I was just immediately like, oh, I wish that was my parent. And like, but I can't remember. And then like Jen is like in the next thing, like, wish that was my parent. And yeah, those are just so specific and powerful moments that, I don't know, it just really helps to know that like other people went through that, and then other people are doing well and thriving, and just a reminder, like, for me to like keep going. And I know lots of other people who had different moments at different parts in this film, and watched it multiple times. And yeah, I think it's just such an important, I know I keep saying that word, but it really is important for our community, and I'm very appreciative of it.
Very nice to hear. It feels good. Thank you.
Yeah. I just thought of something, but then I wrote it in handwriting I can't read. So yeah, so in the film, like people talk about these like specific moments that they were like, those like the first moment they remember of like seeing trans on screen, and that kind of feeling of associating with them. What, I'm sure you have a moment like that or several. Like, I wonder if you could share those with us.
I feel like Crying Game was one of those moments for me. You know, I was 15, I was living in New York. I went with my friends to the movie, and you know, it had been so built up in the media, don't tell the secret. I'm sure, you know, anyone who kind of lived at that moment remembers that time. And so it was an amazing, you know, publicity move, right? And no one told the secret. Everyone kept the secret. And the secret is such a small part of the film. It's actually an incredible film. It's a beautiful story. It's really complicated. It's made really well. And so it was so disappointing, right, to see the secret and understand that we were meant to be disgusted by it. And it was just such a letdown in terms of a viewer in seeing a story. But more so, I mean, I didn't have the language or understanding of my identity at the time, but I just thought it was such a cheap shot. And I over the years, I would return to that image, like as I started to understand myself in the world and imagine romantic experiences. So, you know, that really stained me for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I not to talk about myself, but I really also with Jen too. She mentioned Silence of the Lambs, and I just like, it's such a, yeah, it's like that thing of like, it's a really good movie. I think it's a good movie, but like, wow, what a horrible representation. And there were so many representations like that where I just wouldn't even, because I grew up in like rural Texas. And so I was just like, I just shut it down. You know, I was like, if that's not me, I feel this way, trans is that thing, and it's just very separate. And it took a long time to put them together. Yeah. So like what reactions have you received in general? Trans community, non-trans community, your parents?
It's been wonderful. It's been really great. You know, obviously you don't know what's going to be happening in the world when you start making a film, you know, and 5 years later, you know, when we premiered at Sundance, that was extraordinary. That was something I certainly always wanted as a filmmaker. It was very exciting. And you know, of course, all these sort of markers are complicated, right? Because you feel really validated, but you don't want things to be rested on this external validation. But alas, often you feel really good when you get them. And so that was great. And we had this beautiful premiere in Utah at Sundance, and we brought, I don't know, it was like 30 of us from cast and crew. I mean, it was the biggest trans takeover that Park City had ever seen. And, you know, while we're there, we're hearing about other film festivals, and we're starting to see that we're going to spend like the next 6-8 months, like traveling around the world and going to these festivals and being able to share the film with the community. And then we come back, you know, and a few weeks later, the world shuts down. And that was really wild. And obviously there was all the grief and loss around COVID and just living. But with the film, that was crushing, you know, to not, you know, you work in isolation, filmmakers work in isolation so long. So it's like that sharing with community is really the biggest payoff. It's really the most meaningful, you know, thing to achieve at the end. And I imagined this in community more so than other films because it can be difficult to watch. And I think the part of where I was saying, like on set doing the interviews, having that knowing laughter, I expected that in the audience as well, right? So moments that might feel hard when you're alone might be a little lightened when you're watching it in community. So I was really concerned. You know, and it took us a couple of months, and then by May, we sold it to Netflix, and that was really great. And we had about, you know, 3 weeks until it premiered. And then, you know, we had The Uprising, and that was extraordinary. And again, I was concerned because I was like, I'm not sure this is the film that should be out in the world right now, taking up any space in the conversation. But then it very quickly became clear that, you know, there was so much overlap, you know, with the conversation that the country was finally having and with a lot of the goals of disclosure. So then I was just so grateful to be able to contribute to the conversation. And, you know, and hearing from a lot of people and the cast and crew also hearing from a lot of people has been so meaningful, right? When I hear, we had fellows on set because we prioritized hiring trans people and we couldn't hire a trans person, we mentored trans people. So, you know, we had a handful of fellows that worked with us. And when I hear that they're getting, you know, direct messages from people saying they saw their name in the credits and they were just so excited to know that they worked on this film, or of course, you know, all of our beautiful stars are all getting these wonderful messages. And to be able to be part of something where so many people are hearing that they've made a difference in someone else's life is really meaningful. So I feel a little shy, like, I don't know, I don't want, you know, sharing all the, you know, wonderful things that have been said, but it's great. I don't really know how much more to answer that question, but it's exceeded what I expected. And, you know, even with every challenge that came, it's ended up, you know, taking us to a better place. So while we lost the sort of in-person international audience, we gained being part of a moment that will change our country, you know, hopefully forever.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it feels like it happened exactly like it was supposed to happen. Just when so many people could pay so much attention to it.
Yeah.
You talked about your production model, and I wonder if you could expand on that, like, as far as hiring trans people, hiring queer people, how that went down.
I mean, I think just as much as I knew in the beginning, the research couldn't be done in isolation. Like, I knew, I just felt very compelled to bring in as many trans voices to every stage of the filmmaking, you know, and I mean, what's so beautiful about filmmaking is that it's the most collaborative of art forms, right? And every aspect of the production behind the scenes affects, you know, what you're going to see. All that invisible work, you know, informs what is made visible. And I think that's taken for granted so much. And, you know, it's great that we're seeing trans people in front of the camera, but we need to see more trans people. We need to see people who have a stake in the story behind the camera. And whatever that looks like. I don't want to say that you should only be telling stories about your own existence, because I think it's more complicated than that. It's about having a stake and having a risk, right? Having something that is on the line. And so, you know, everything from how my DP would frame and light people is very particular to a trans person, you know, just as it is for anyone of any race, right? And so we're dealing with the intersections of so many things with trans bodies, of race and gender, sexuality and age, and, you know, so I really needed to have people who understood these things implicitly. So from the beginning, we knew we were going to prioritize hiring trans people, and there aren't that many trans people in Hollywood who are working, who have the experience. And we did a national search and found fantastic people. And when we couldn't, we hired a non-trans person. But part of that process of hiring them was for them to understand that they would be mentoring someone. So I wanted to make sure that person was excited about that. Like, it wasn't just, okay, I'll do it because it's for the job. It's something that they would be really invested in. And you know, we only hired queer people, which was great. And it was a beautiful experience. Like, you know, anytime we would have, you know, a few minutes down on set, I would see someone like drawing a diagram on the ground to explain, you know, a certain lighting condition. But even more so, what I realized and hadn't really kind of understood at the time was that it was really a mutual exchange, right? There was a skill sharing, but there was also life experience sharing. And that really became clear when our gaffer, this woman named Desi, she told us that she was so moved by her experience. She was a cis white lesbian. And she told us she was so moved by this experience. You know, she felt she was an ally, but she hadn't really worked with trans people. She certainly hadn't heard the stories that she heard when she was on set. And, you know, she really enjoyed mentoring. And she realized that how hard it was going to be for trans people to get into the union, into IATSE. And she happened to be the president of her local chapter. And she went back and instituted the first trans sensitivity training, you know, and that was incredible, right? And that's some of the invisible work that I'm most proud of, right? That I'm most excited about, to seeing the domino effect that will continue to happen. And so doing that and seeing that, you know, Desi's life was changed, right? Not only did she impart skills onto a fellow who can now, you know, have something on their resume and have a foot in the door and get a job, but her life was changed as well because of the life experience she got to experience from working.
That's incredible, and that's so unique. I mean, You don't see that. You don't see that in Hollywood. I saw that in a different form on Transparent on Amazon, but that was, yeah. How did you come at, like, was this like we're going to take this model, like someone else has done this, or was it, we were just like, you were thinking about this?
It was just something I wanted. On my other films on a much, much smaller scale, I had ideals that I committed to, and I knew this was going to be on a bigger scale. And I made that commitment and was very lucky that my producers at the time, Amy Shoulder and Laverne Cox, of course, were 100% behind this idea and understood how it had to be prioritized. It certainly inflated our budget, not only because we had extra people to pay, but we paid everyone, right? So our fellows got an honorarium. If someone needed childcare, that was taken care of. And all of our crew, was given very decent day rates. And that's not the norm for documentaries. So our budget was large. And there were certainly moments we were laughed out of boardrooms because it was a big budget and questioned as to this production model. Like, literally people would say things like, oh, you just want to hire the best person for the job. And it was like, actually a trans person is the best person for the job, right? You can't teach life experience. You can teach a skill, but you can't teach life experience. So it kind of started in this place of, I know trans people have to tell this story. That was always the nexus of this film. It was always the center of it. And then it just, in all the aspects of production, I had to figure out how to make that possible.
I mean, it's so shocking to hear that language from people, but it's honestly like most prevalent in Hollywood. And it's so great to hear that, through pushing and pushing, you're able to do that. Because I feel like, I don't know, just so many compromises are made where you're like, I have these ideals, and then just someone who speaks in an authoritative voice is like, well, you can't do that. And you're like, okay. And I don't know, I think it's just important for me to remember, for other people who are working in the industry or going into the industry, that the things you push for matter. You can get results if you push for them. You just sometimes have to push past scary, not nice people sometimes.
Like, it's, if you're doing the work only for yourself, like that's just a very small, myopic worldview. And I feel like you'll never really be satisfied with any outcome, right? But if you're doing it for a bigger goal, like then it's endless, right? Like then the joys and the effects are so much longer than you ever anticipate. Anytime I hear, I'm in touch with so many people that I worked with, and constantly hearing, the next job they're getting, and the confidence they felt they were able to kind of step into after being on the set, with us. And that means more than any film festival or award or fantastic review, as much as I want all those things. It's definitely, it means more to have a larger view in mind of beyond just your own personal achievements. It was a lot of work, but filmmaking is a lot of work, right? So if this is the one area that people say they need to like not spend their time on, that's really speaking to their priorities. And if a small indie film could have that production model, the larger studios really have no excuse.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we should go to question and answer.
Sure. Yeah, we have a question from Victoria Ippolito. So Victoria, I'm going to move you over to the panelist side, and if you'd like to turn on your video, please do at that point, or else just turn on your microphone to ask your question. Okay, moving you now.
Hey, I can never figure out how to put my video on, but oh, here I come. Hi. I just wanted to say thank you so much. This documentary was so amazing. And it's funny because when I look back at the media that I saw as a child, I'm like, wow, I had no idea. I did not pay attention to things when I was little. And I'm like, it's so detrimental. So my question is basically, what steps do you think that we can take in general as storytellers to stop perpetuating the same narratives going on, because I think representation across the board is important. And I think, to be honest, casting notices themselves are not worded in a way that is inviting, and it also is still stuck in one narrative. And so I just feel like, what else do you think personally that we can do to further get more accurate representation and storytelling? Because that's what I like to see. And to be honest, those are the most engaging stories, real, fully formed people.
It's such a good question. You know, my first response is you have to do your homework, right? But I don't know if that's realistic in our culture. So the second response is we have to really change who has power, right? We have to empower more people. We have to decentralize the power. And I think we're seeing that happen in, you know, the new standards that the Oscars, that the Academy put out. You know, that's really an attempt to shift who's empowered in these moments. I hope we see results from that. But, you know, those who have access to power are in this position to give access to others, right? And the people they choose to give access to says so much about who they are. So we have to kind of shine a light on who is giving access to whom and challenging that dynamic of that access.
Great, yeah, I agree, thank you.
So I'm wondering if our audience is a little bit shy, but this is a good moment for everyone to pop a question. Oh, here we go. Okay. So let me invite over Trent Wexler.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Sorry, I was not expecting to be on camera. I thought I would just send my question and then someone would, I don't know, they'd read it, but hello. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to see you.
I was wondering what resources there might be available for queer individuals that are looking to get into the film industry that we might not know about.
What resources are available? I mean, honestly, I moved here 4 years ago and I did not have my sight on breaking into the industry.
Right.
So this is all kind of new for me and it's fantastic and I'm thrilled and I love my agent and my manager and it's a place I did not expect to go. So that's just transparency. Like when I was in your position, I wasn't even thinking about what resources there would be in Hollywood. But you know, there are fellowships that exist, you know, but they only accept they accept such few people. And I wish I had an answer for you, but I guess
okay.
I don't know what you know, so I don't know what you don't know.
No, that's totally fair. I appreciate you being honest and transparent. And I guess it was just the wrong question for this panel. That's maybe my fault. But yeah, thank you for the movie. And it was very powerful experience watching that when I first did. And that's all I have to say. Okay. Bye.
Really quickly, I know this is not my Q&A. I'll just very quickly, as someone who did come out here with my eyes set on the Hollywood, really the number one thing, and I think Sam's really like hit the nail so well on the head, is it really is, at least in my experience, about the queer people I've known. It's about queer people helping other queer people. That's really been the biggest thing for me. So and again, that's not like super helpful as far as like, here's the exact thing you should go do.
Yeah, of course.
but you know, hate the word network, but you know, talk to people. I don't know. Yeah, like it really is just kind of be open to expanding your web is what I found. And the like people I know are the people that help the most.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is definitely, it's encouraging to hear that works. And I appreciate you for the wisdom. Thank you so much. How do I leave?
Well, I got you. Okay, so let me welcome up Ella Harris. Ella, you're on our side of things now, and I'm not seeing a microphone or a camera for you yet. So that sometimes means that that your system needs to just connect to the audio for the microphone. But I'll go out to Shayna Woolley in the meantime. So to give Ella a moment. Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm sorry about that.
That's
I
okay.
thought my Wi-Fi was going to cut out there for a second, which would have been very embarrassing. First of all, hello. Thank you so much for being here and talking with us. This is very exciting, and I have watched the documentary a million times. It's very quickly become one of my favorites. Also, I have to mention that I actually am doing a presentation on it on Friday. So,
What are you going to present? What are you going to say?
So actually, I was coming because I was I might as well take some notes. This would be helpful. It's for a different department though. It's the social analysis of gender. So it's kind of a fun. I'm excited to bring a more critical media lens to it as a film student. But I honestly, you've answered so much, which I've really appreciated, and I'm curious what. You've talked about this kind of defensiveness that you had towards going into a Hollywood story or narrative, and I'm curious, I have such a hard time separating the two, separating Hollywood from disclosure at this point. I'm curious what you had really set out for in the first part, initially.
Well, I mean, yeah, disclosure is Hollywood. It's looking at Hollywood very specifically. What I set out initially was to look at more from the sort of the world that I was navigating. So independent filmmakers, I was interested in looking at documentaries because I have a lot of critique about how documentaries are made about trans people and, why certain ones get funded and why certain ones get, audiences. And I have a lot to say about that. And then just looking at more indie work, because when I looked away from mainstream, I went towards independent work, and that's where I found it much more expansive. And there were a lot more opportunities and in terms of responding to my intellectual curiosities, and it was much more exciting and beautiful, in my opinion. And so I was looking, and I think also naively, I was thinking that we could look at a much wider girth of genre. We could be able to look across different mediums. So not only film and TV, but maybe also comics and maybe also looking at how YouTube has been part of the conversation. And, so just kind of going beyond just this one isolated Hollywood experience, which is not one isolated experience at all, but I didn't see initially that was the story I wanted to tell. But very quickly it became clear that was that felt to be the most important story for the moment to focus on.
It almost sounds kind of like if I can ask a follow-up, it sounds kind of like an interesting starting point that I feel like disclosure in a way has become an answer to the movie itself, in kind of this call of needing this trans representation and being able to have an actual point on the timeline to start a new version of representation, a new narrative. What do you think the forward movement of disclosure in the industry will look like from this?
I mean, I really, really, really hope to see more of the production model being replicated. I also think, all of the lessons learned and explored in disclosure can be applied to so many different types of media. I think it's just, this is a particular case study, you know, if you will, in particular also applied to social justice movements, right? So from an activist lens, like what is the goal of visibility because movements are always talking about visibility, because visibility is so important. You know, humans need to be mirrored, we need reflections, we need role models, we need to see ourselves. But to have that, I feel that we need to be more aware of that paradox, you know, and the backlash that happens when we get this visibility. And to understand, you know, that it's not a one-to-one relationship between visibility and backlash, but that history that has led up to that moment certainly influences the backlash that ensues, right? So all these horrendous and distorted images that we've seen of trans people the past 100 years, there's certainly has influenced the fact that there is such a rallying cry to keep trans people in public space, right? Mm-hmm. So to kind of understand and apply that to different movements feels like a wonderful hope and goal. The production model would be a wonderful hope and goal. Yeah, I think those are forefront on my mind at this moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Sheena, you are already on our panelist side, so feel free to jump in.
Hi. I was very unprepared for the video, but now I'm here. So I just have a super simple question, which is like, I mean, it kind of is similar to what the last person just asked, but what's your hope for transmedia representation in the future?
I mean, there's so many answers to that question. On one hand, I really want disclosure to allow people to really interrogate their belief systems about trans people. I want trans people to be able to interrogate the belief systems we've internalized. I want more trans people to be empowered and paid for whatever work they're doing on either side of the camera. There's this idea that we're, especially in documentaries, that well, that's not what you're asking. So it's a whole other issue. But I think that's, you know, as opposed to being able to say, I want to see a story that looks like this, this, and this, you know, or casting. I mean, those are the last things to happen, right? The first things are the ideas. It's like what goes on paper, and then who's going to produce it and who's going to fund it. And it's, you know, when all those decisions are being made, that's when we need to see the people, again, who's most at stake, who has, you know, a risk. I keep thinking the phrase skin in the game, but I think the origin of that phrase must be really problematic, because it's like a red flag keeps coming up every time I think of that phrase. But that idea, like, you really have to have a stake in it. And so that moment from the beginning, when an idea is percolating, it shouldn't go any further until there are trans people in that conversation. And so that's what I want to see, because I know when that is the norm, the end result on screen is going to be better.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, let's bring over V. Marks.
Hi, it's so cool to be here and meet both of you. The documentary was so well crafted and so brilliant. As like a, I guess like as like a Zoomer trans filmmaker, I really appreciated, like Gen Z, I really appreciated like, I guess like just like the context and the like history, you know, of just like what I want to do, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I guess I just really admired how like the interviews that we saw on screen like so clearly fit into like I guess like the story that you were trying to tell. And I guess I was just wondering how much of that came like before the interviews that we got to see on screen, because you also said that there were interviews you did beforehand. And I guess like how much of that, like I guess the shaping of the documentary happened, and like and deciding what you wanted to focus on happened like after those interviews.
I mean, that's a whole class that I could teach, right? So there was a rigorous research process, you know, that included those research interviews, but then also included just hours and hours of going into archives and watching a ton of things and gathering all these clips and reading texts that some spoke directly to trans stuff, but others, you know, to other types of general media criticism and literacy and analysis. And then also looking at and speaking with Susan Stryker a lot, who's the trans historian of the moment, our leading trans historian, and really trying to start to craft, like, what is the history of trans people in this country as long as we sort of documented and been aware of it, and how does that intersect with the evolution of images, right? And so as I started to be able to see those two stories, I wanted to tie them together in certain ways. And so I kind of, you know, through that history, I started to land on touchstones that I wanted to make sure that we explored. And Laverne was also very involved in this process. And meanwhile, while I was doing all this history, I was also doing pre-interviews with everyone you saw on screen. And I did very lengthy pre-interviews because I was looking for stories to guide the film. Like, I really think having something based in a personal anecdote is a really nice way to show a situation and not just say it. Even though they're telling these stories, it's still a way of showing an emotion rather than saying, you know, I feel this thing. But when you give an example of a story, I think that's what the audience remembers. So, you know, as I was having these conversations, the pre-interviews were also deeply informing my research, right? So then maybe either it would intersect with the touchstone I'd sort of already drafted, or it become a new touchstone. So it was all very organic, right? There are a lot of different types of research happening at the same time. And as things sort of would overlap on each other, their significance would either rise or fall. And so that's kind of like, that was our starting place. And then we had these very long interviews, you know, from 1 hour to 4 hours on camera. So there's so much that wasn't in the film. And then, you know, we got to editing. And I had, you know, I knew the messages that are the way we bookended the film with talking about the paradox of visibility, that was the biggest takeaway that was important for me. And how are we going to build up a story to hold that argument, right? So, you know, everything had to kind of speak back to that experience. And it was really important that every example we gave a nuanced example, and meaning that no one was demonized. There was no one way of looking at something. I really wanted to show different reactions and different experiences based on the same material. So that's sort of an outline of how I approached the structure and the research.
That's so cool. I kind of have a follow-up question, if that's okay. Can I ask, like, what you regret leaving out the most? Because I imagine a lot. There's a lot.
People, you know, that I regret. I wouldn't say left out. Is just budgeting, scheduling, you know, deadlines. You know, the conversations around non-binary representation have really catapulted since we did our interviews. So just the nature of the time, people just didn't have that much to say about it. And we tried, and it just didn't land. I wish I'd had more time and resources to look at disability and trans lives on screen. And hopefully that will be something that we can do in a follow-up.
Cool, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there a 5-hour director's cut?
Yes.
Oh, good, awesome. Great.
I wanted to just quickly jump in with what might be the last question from the audience, which comes from a faculty member, Lisa Lehman. And Lisa's asking to hear, Sam, your critique of docs.
In the last 4 minutes, my critique of docs. Lisa, can you maybe specify a little bit? Because I have a lot of critiques of docs.
Lisa, let me at least give you access to your mic. Okay, according to Zoom, you have talking permitted now.
Okay. Hey, Sam, we've met before, but years ago when you screened at USC. I don't know, I'm just super intrigued. I mean, I make docs, you know, I made a doc. I made maybe one of the first films about someone's transition that premiered at Sundance in 1990, and now I'm doing a follow-up to that.
Which was
and I'm it's called Metamorphosis, the first one. And I'm cisgender, so there's a whole critique, and my follow-up is I'm actually holding myself accountable for that. So it's super complicated. Anyway, have high aspirations, but I make docs. I'm just, you alluded to lots of critiques, so I'd love to hear them. I'm all ears.
Well, you can see a much longer explanation in an interview I did with Alex Huaz in Jump Cut magazine in 2016. And then it's also going to be published in a book called Insurgent Media that's coming out soon.
Thanks.
And it's like a 20-page interview, so it's a lot. And I start to dig into my critique. But the first thing that I have been really fighting for in the documentary world is equity, is financial equity.
Yeah.
And I really, I'm pushing back against this idea that it's somehow challenging the truth if we compensate the people that we're working with financially. I believe that, we compensate experts in our culture, and people that are in our documentaries are the experts of their own lives, and they should be compensated for their time. And especially when we are making a film about a marginalized community, often marginalized communities have less access to resources and money. And so they might have turned down a job to do this interview, right? To be part of your film. And so I just feel it's really, really important that funders start to understand that we need to compensate the subjects, the protagonists, the stars, the cast, the talent, the people in our films, the people who make our films possible, the people who allow us to use their lives for us to then walk away with cultural capital as directors. There's no guarantee the film will be successful, but we still have something to put on our resume, whereas the people that we worked with, they may never have anything to show for it. So I do really believe that from the start, we need to compensate people for their time and compensate them with money.
Thank you. I think that's a great point of conversation. I'm going to shoot you an email. I'd like to invite you to I teach in a cinematic ethics class.
Cool.
And I hope you can come.
I would love to.
And I can compensate you with an honorarium. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm just checking on whether or not Lauren, who placed a statement in the Q&A box, would like to come on live or just leave her kudos there as something that for the two of you to be able to take a look at. Lauren, are you out there? If you are, just raise your hand if you want me to bring you over. Oh, okay, great.
Oh, I see you posted that jump cut piece. Oh, Bryce did it too. My friend Bryce is watching and posted a link to it, and Alex looks like you posted it too.
Yes, I credit to Bryce. I copied and pasted from Q&A. Lauren, you're on this side of things if you have access to your mic.
Hi. Oh, hi.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. So I'm actually going to read this out loud. Would that make sense for you, Lauren?
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, no, I thought there was a problem with your mic there for a second.
I was just delayed.
Oh.
No, I just wanted to say to Ellen, it's Eleanor, right? So I've known Sam. I don't really know Sam that well. I know Amy. So I've seen the film a few times and I've known about it for a while, but I learned a lot today thanks to your questions. So that was basically, I think, my statement.
Oh,
I
cool.
thought really insightful questions, and I got a lot out of this. So thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
That was it. It was kind of more of a statement. I said it's not really a question. You know why I didn't have a question? Because your questions were so good.
I mean, anytime you want to just, give me compliments, I'm like, that's great. Yeah, no complaints here.
Compliments to both of you.
Nice
Thank you.
to see you, Lauren.
Good to see you, Sam.
Also, we have a question from Adam. If you're going to have an accessible archive of the interviews and transcripts from the film.
The ones that didn't make it into the film, or a transcript of the actual documentary?
My guess is probably an archive of the full interview with each guest. I'm paraphrasing, but I think
yeah, that's to be determined. I would there's a lot of different possibilities. Maybe we'll just make an archive, like an oral history project archive. Maybe we'll make a series, a disclosure series, where, we kind of dig deeper into different issues and use that material that we weren't able to use. It's to be determined still, but eventually we're also working on a book. So it will find its way one way or the other into the public.
So I think that's all of our audience questions. I'll give Eleanor the last word from the moderated side, but thank you so much to both of you for sharing this evening with us, and especially for this movie and for getting it out there and inspiring people with it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for hosting and inviting me.
Hopefully in person someday.
Absolutely. When we can breathe outside.
Breathe outside would be good. What's something you just want us to, I had a few more questions, but just big headline, what do you want, especially these students here at USC and content creators, what's the big thing you want them to take away moving forward?
Twofold. One is that, for people whose voices have been so often marginalized, that there are people out there fighting for them, and that they should feel like their voices matter and continue to create. And for those who have more traditionally had access to the means of production, feel free to share and make sure that you're giving opportunities to people who haven't had those opportunities in the past. And for anyone who's out there and who's not in control of any kind of means of production and just enjoys watching, I just encourage, as always, people to watch and enjoy things about everything on the spectrum of the human existence. There are so many stories that inspire and move you and break your heart from all walks of life. And I just think that this is a moment when we have access to the entire history of cinema, pretty much through streaming services. And this is a good opportunity to explore something new, something that's challenging, something that you're not expecting. That's really my goal as a programmer, is to inspire people to learn about, what humanity is all about beyond just their own experience.
Great. And what about you, Sam? Takeaways, big takeaways. One word.
Alex was talking about that. I was remembering this keynote that Grace Lee gave at this conference called Getting Real that happens every 2 years. And it's the largest documentary conference that exists, I believe. And she ended her keynote by saying, watch, well, she was talking about going to panels, but I kind of took it as a, panels or films or TV. Watch something that you don't think is for you. Watch something that doesn't necessarily speak to you. And that really resonated with me, because I so often am looking for what could possibly speak to me, and not want to waste my time on the other things. But I was like, oh, that's just as much of a disservice, than, it's just as much of a disservice, even when you're coming from a marginalized perspective. So I encourage everyone to think about that and watch something that you really don't think speaks to you. Read something that you really don't think will resonate with you. You just never know what you're going to take away. But also for students, and particularly filmmaking students, the best advice I got in grad school was from one of my professors named Ricardo. And he just was like, at the time I was adjuncting, and, maybe I wanted to get a full-time job, but I also wanted to make work. And I was, bartending and doing a million different things. And he was like, you just need to make work. Just keep making work. He's, even if you're on the subway and it's with your phone and you're making a movie with people's feet, you have to just keep making work. And I needed to hear that. I really needed to hear that, because he was like, adjuncting only leads to adjuncting. Sorry, adjuncts. I did it for 10 years. I had to leave. I had to stop. Apprenticing only leads to apprenticing. we have to keep our eye on what it is we want to do to fulfill our lives. And you know, so many of us have to juggle so much in order to pursue our dreams. But just keep making work. Keep making work. And also, I think what you were saying earlier, Eleanor, of queer community, you find like-minded people and just work on each other's projects and help each other and build that trust with people that you have the most in common with, because that's where the most meaningful work will come from.
Great, beautiful, beautiful answers. No, for real, for real.
What about you, Eleanor? What do you want to leave people with?
Oh, well, you know, just clean up your houses. Take a shower every day in the pin. I mean, honestly, the feeling of keep working. Like the best thing I've ever done, I'm a writer, the best thing I've ever done is just write something every day, even if it's just a sentence that doesn't make any sense. There's just, it's the thing that keeps me alive, and I need to be reminded of that. And yeah, just, you know, as cheesy as it is, like, just don't give up. If this is what you want to do, this is what you want to do. And it sometimes really is that simple. Getting there is very difficult. But I truly believe that you find the people you're supposed to find, and you help each other. And yeah, just never forget to help each other, I guess. Yeah, I wasn't prepared for my own question. Oh my God.
I was watching a speech that Ava DuVernay gave, a keynote that she gave a while ago. And she said this thing, if you're in your lane, there's no traffic. And I really loved that. And because the visual was so nice, obviously being in LA, but she was just saying, like, if you're in your lane, if you know your path, if you know where you're trying to go, there's not going to be any traffic. So it's just being really clear, you know, every day, figuring out what will get you to that clarity. What is your, I know we're about ending, but Eleanor, I'm curious, your practice, do you have like a morning practice of writing? Is there a certain time of day you make sure you're always right?
Yeah, I mean, morning is better for me. Morning's better. I've become a morning person because that is when I can get the most down without, I feel like the longer I go through the day, the more I start judging myself on everything. And it's like, I do the best editing in the afternoon. I do the best like creative work in the morning. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I just always carry around a pen with me, and I always carry around a notebook. And I just need to have it. And it's like a security blanket. And sometimes it's a journal, like a teenage girl. And sometimes it's, I can't draw, but sometimes it's like drawings that I'll never show anybody. Sometimes it's poetry I'll never read to anybody. But whatever it is, it keeps me going. And just off of what you said, just like be open to your creative vision changing, you know. Mine keeps changing, you know, but it gets clearer and clearer. But the open-mindedness to like, maybe someone else is going to help me come up with a different goal. I mean, I feel that way after this evening. So it's just, yeah, it's just great to get refocused on things and know that like we really, I mean, again, more cheese, but it's like we really do make a difference, you know, like this film has made a massive difference, like clearly. And I'm sure, you know, I'm sure it's not the last of them, for sure. So I can't wait to see what you make next. Can't wait for the 5-hour director's cut DVD. Yeah, this has been great. Thanks for asking me to ask questions.
Yeah, so great to meet you all and talk with you all.
Yeah, nice to meet you and everybody.
Thanks again. And to everyone out there, good night.